meditation, we're not interested in control at all, controlling anything. And what I would recommend when you're in the why and you're practicing meditation and there's noise, and by the way, it would probably be hard for you to find a place where there's no noise, even in your house, or anywhere that you practice. So there's always going to be something happening around you. And the other noise that's always going to be there is this, that's noise too, right? So what the practice is, you do the same thing with the noise as you're doing with this. It's the same thing. Anything that's happening that has the ability to attract your attention, what we're practicing is not letting that happen. So whether it's noise, whether it's thinking, whether it's physical sensations, whether it's losing consciousness, going to sleep, right? The idea is to keep coming back to the breath. Just no matter what's happening, just keep coming back to the breath. And one thing that you can utilize as far as the idea of noise is concerned is to see if you can hear it as sound instead of noise. Noise has a negative connotation, it's sound. Or sometimes people come to the class and they say, well, I couldn't meditate because of I was distracted by the noise. Distraction is a thought. The sound happens and then it goes into your system and a thought pops up and says, oh, that's a distraction, you can't meditate. And we're so used to believing our thoughts without question that happens and then that's the way it is. And then the person says that, I can't meditate because there's a distraction. It's not true, but it's a good example of how we live our lives. We live our lives in reaction. We live our lives in terms of everything that's happening. We think about it, we have feelings about it, and then we act. The problem is our thoughts and feelings are giving us a distorted perception of what's happening. And that's why reactions are so often problematic. Now, if you look in your life, how many times have you been in situations, especially in relationships, where something happens or somebody says something, right? And it goes into your system and you interpret what they said or did. And if your interpretation of what they said or did is negative or threatening, you react. You might get frustrated, you might get angry, you might attack them verbally, you might, decide to get away from them and so forth. And unfortunately, it is often the case that when you go and slow down and actually look at what the evidence says, it's often the case that what that person said or did had nothing to do with what you thought they did, had nothing to do with the way you reacted to what was happening. And so if that's the way you behave, then guess what? They react to your reaction, right? And then it's react, and the stakes get higher, right? And before you know it, you got a serious problem. You're angry, the other person feels like this person's threatening me. And the deeper that goes, the farther into the rabbit hole you go, the reactions get more and more intense because the interpretation feels more threatening. So, did I answer your question? Okay, thank you. Any other questions about the technique or the teaching? It's very important to understand, if I were to ask you a question right now, and the question I were to ask you is, did you succeed or fail just now during that practice? Did you succeed or fail? How many of you succeeded?
Everyone should have, but I know.
Don't do smart rap me. Right? How many of you think that you failed at it? Yeah. So this is evidence of the mind. The mind takes everything and judges it and evaluates it. Did you ever notice that? You could be just driving your car and you look around and oh, that's a nice car, that's an ugly car, that person's ugly, that person's fat, weather's terrible. It's a machine in your head that's judging and evaluating things all the time. And if you don't know that it's a machine and you identify with it and you think that's me, then you're a judging and evaluating machine. But you don't know that it's a machine, you think it's you, so you think you're very judgmental. And then you have to justify that you are, or try and ignore that you are, or try and explain that you are, because it's a dysfunctional way of working. It's a dysfunctional way of relating to reality. It doesn't work. It leaves you suffering. You know, and the purpose of meditation, as I teach it, is not stress reduction, it's suffering reduction. It's suffering reduction. And as a psychologist, I'm very interested in that because that's my job, is to reduce suffering for people. And it does reduce suffering, but only if you do it consistently. So going back to what I said, how many people failed and how many succeeded? None of you failed, and none of you succeeded. And the reason I ask the question is because it points out that your mind will do with this what it does with everything. It'll have you feel like I'm doing it well, I'm not doing it well, I'm succeeding, I'm failing. This is a practice, it's not a performance. So if the way you relate to this is I'm trying to meditate, I'm trying to do it better, I'm trying to do it right? You will fail at meditation if you do that. The only way you can succeed at practicing meditation is to practice it. And when you practice meditation the way it's meant to be practiced, whatever happens during the time that you're meditating is always perfect. It's always perfect. Why? Because when you're practicing, you're not trying to do anything in particular. You have a technique that you're practicing. That's all. You just keep practicing the technique. The mind is a hungry, gullible, reality, right? It always wants to get paid. It wants to know, what am I going to get if I do this? And how long will it take for me to get that, right? And so it looks at everything like that, right? But part of this practice is for you to wake up in such a way where you realize that you are not your mind. You are not that mind. And so then when you practice meditation, it goes back to what Ram Dass said, a teacher from back in my day, when I was a young man. He said, be here now. You've probably all heard of that, right? Be here now, right? It's an interesting concept because the truth is you can't not be here now. That's impossible. You've never ever been anywhere but now. You can't ever be anywhere but now. So why would he say be here now? Well, the reason he would say be here now is because even though you're here now, you don't think you are. That's the problem. You think you're at some other time. You think you're busy thinking about yesterday. That's not being here now. You're busy thinking about tomorrow. That's not being here now. So being here now means that you're aware that the thinking is happening. Remember I said we're not trying to control or change anything. You're aware that the thinking is happening, but because you're aware that the thinking is happening, the awareness that is aware of it is here now. That's what's here now, is the awareness. And when you practice meditation and you move your attention from the thinking activity to being aware of the body breathing, and this is a very important aspect of the practice, because the idea is that if you get away from your mind long enough, you may realize that you're not your mind. If you get away from your mind long enough, you may realize that you don't have to follow what it does. You don't have to believe what it says about anything. You can start to pay attention to it, and when it's not accurate, you don't follow it. When it's crazy, you don't get involved with it. Right? It's not always crazy, it's just crazy most of the time. Right? Which means you're not always crazy, you're just crazy most of the time. Right? And even if your craziness doesn't extend itself to other people, right, the craziness I'm referring to is what the voice in your head's doing. The voice in your head is a voice that it's a one-trick pony. The only thing the mind knows how to do is to survive, right? And that's because we have inherited a brain and a mind from the Stone Ages, right? And it has not caught up to the time. Meditation is about updating the computer. It's about, we now know in terms of computer software, if you don't update it, it's going to go out of date. It's not going to function, right? It's going to be corrupt, right? You have corrupt files. You familiar with all that? You have a corrupt file. It's going to cause the software not to work, right? Well, your brain is a corrupt file. Your mind is a corrupt file, right? And the only way it's going to get up to date and function accurately and produce the results that you want, right, is if you learn about how it works. And by learning about how it works, you can retrain it. You can update it. You can You can reboot it, or you can reboot it to have it. We now know that the brain is a learning organism. It's learning all the time. And if what you're doing is crazy, it's learning to be crazy all the time. And if what you're thinking is crazy, the brain is being trained to be a crazy brain, right? And then the brain produces anxiety and depression and all the other things that keep you disturbed and upset, right? And the pharmaceutical companies make tons of money off of that. So
You're meditating a half an hour a day and you're trying to retrain your brain that's been conditioned for, in my case,
yeah.
over 60 years.
Uh-huh.
So
Yeah.
it's quite an uphill. I know that's me talking, but...
No, but you see, now watch, but this is an opportunity to see how the mind works, right? I understand that, that's a pretty rational statement that she made, right? But it's not true. It's not true. It's not true, because if you practice meditation, what did I say in the beginning? Consistency is critical, right? Doing it consistent is critical. Why am I saying that? I'm saying that because if you do it consistently, at a certain point in time, the meditation will extend itself, not just when you're practicing formally, it'll extend itself to start to happen when you're just walking around in your life. You're practicing it formally now because you don't yet, it yet hasn't become a habit, hasn't become a way of being for you. So you're practicing it formally. But if you do that consistently over time, you'll be walking around one day and something will happen and you'll realize, wait a minute, I'm aware of the thinking that's happening in relationship to what's going on here, and that's new. That's new. That's something that I didn't see before. And if that is something that I can maintain throughout my day, it'll change my life, right? Because if I can pay attention to what my voice in the head is saying, right? And I can see when it's off the rails, when I can see when it's being crazy and I don't relate to it, I don't get involved with it, I don't allow it to control my mouth, it might save my marriage. Yeah.
Is there a difference between thinking about thinking versus being aware of it?
Well, thinking about thinking can be useful in terms of, you know, kind of understanding how it works, right? But when we're practicing meditation, one of the things that's very important is that when you move your attention from the thinking activity to the body breathing, the mistake that a lot of people make that will be in the way of them ever really practicing meditation, it's subtle, but it's important. You move your attention from the thinking activity to the awareness of the body breathing, and you understand that what I'm practicing here is not thinking. It is possible to be aware and not think. Even when you're thinking, there are gaps between thoughts, aren't there? Yeah, so there's something there besides thinking. It's not straight thinking all the time. There is an awareness in which the thinking is happening, and that's what's there in the spaces between the thoughts, okay? So when we're practicing meditation and we say, okay, we'll practice moving your attention away from thinking to watching the body breathing, being aware of the body breathing. The question now is, do I think that I'm not thinking? If I think that I'm not thinking and I don't catch it, I will never practice meditation. You have to be aware of the fact that when I move my attention from the thinking activity to being aware of the body breathing, I may not actually experience no thinking and just being aware of the body breathing for a while that I've been practicing. I might be practicing for months before I notice for the first time, oh, there was no thought. There was no thought this time. That's why it's so important to understand. Meditation requires a conviction about the teachings. It requires a commitment to the practice. It requires patience and diligence. It requires persistence more than anything else. More than anything else. I've often likened it to learning how to play the piano. You know, if you go to learn how to play the piano and your intention is to, to sit down in front of the keyboard, a lot of people buy pianos and sell them later. Right? A lot of people buy musical instruments and sell them later, right? I bought drums because I thought, I used to have a conga drum in college. I used to play the conga drum. Oh, so I know how to do it. I know how to play it. I have good rhythm, right? So I bought a whole set of drums, right? And after I bought the whole set of drums and I sat there with the drumsticks and started to try and play the drums, I realized I can't do this at all. And now I've spent all this money on this drum set. It was an electronic drum set too.
Do you still have it? My son wants one.
No, I sold it.
Buy it for me.
I sold it. But the point is, you know, the point is you realize if you're going to learn how to play the drums, you've got to make a commitment in time to practice playing the drums and start with the rudimentary practice, you know, to get your chops, to learn how to actually play the drums, you know. And it's not easy to play the drums. You know, when you think about it, you have your foot with the bass drum, you have your hands playing tom-tom drums and this drum, and you have another cymbal here, and you have cymbals here. It's not easy at all. It's really an interesting thing that how coordinated the brain can become in terms of doing things like playing the drums. But unless you're committed to going through a practice that's going to require consistency and patience over time, you are not going to play the drums. And even if you do that and you don't have a good teacher, you're probably not going to play the drums very well, right? The same exact thing is true with meditation. You know, when people come to this class all the time for the first time, right? And most of them, that's the last time. Because I've seen it time and time again. People try this, and when they try this, they say, "Oh, my mind was racing. I failed. My mind was racing. This is uncomfortable. You know, it wasn't pleasurable. And if they're telling me I have to do this every single day, and I have to work up to a time frame, I have to work up to a practice session that's long enough that it makes a difference in terms of training my brain. You can't just do it for 5 minutes at a time. You may start in the beginning by doing it 5 minutes at a time because that's all you can take is 5 minutes at a time. But if you persist through 5 minutes at a time and then gradually start to expand, once you get up to a certain number of times, once you get up to a certain time, you've now entered the period of time that will result in good return, and a good return for each session. You know, that the brain will have been exposed to a different experience of existing because of the time that you spent doing this. To get to that, it's going to take patience, and you're going to have to practice for a while. And the practice that you're doing will not be producing many results or any results at all. It may produce some stress reduction, but it's not going to produce the bigger thing. It's not going to produce the promise. It's not going to produce what the possibility is for practicing meditation. And the possibility for practicing meditation over time is that if you persist in time and you actually start to meditate, right, that what happens is the way you experience yourself changes, the way you experience life changes, the way you experience your body changes, the way you experience other people changes. And this is dramatic when this begins to happen. And when this begins to happen, then it's easy to practice meditation because you start to get the payback, and you start to realize the value of it, and you start to realize the promise is true. That you can, if you persist in time, you can get to a place where you will be peaceful consistently, you will be satisfied consistently, you will be happy consistently. And it won't be a function of your circumstances. This is the beauty of meditation. It won't be a function of your circumstances. Most human beings are living a life that depends on circumstances, aren't they? Yeah. Depends on circumstances. If you have a lot of money, that's good. If you don't, that's bad. If you have a healthy body, that's good. If you don't, that's bad. If you live in a place where the climate is always comfortable, that's good. If you don't, it could be bad, it could be good, depending upon your personality and conditioning. But it's all circumstantial, right? Your daily life is circumstantial, isn't it? You get up in the morning and you hope that by the end of the day, nothing terrible happens. And if it does, it throws you, right? It throws you because you're used to the pattern. Everybody's used to the patterns, right? You get up, you go through the same motions every day. You know, you try and keep things under control, right? So nothing terrible happens. You try and keep yourself under control so you don't cause anything terrible to happen. Right? And so with the practice of meditation, what becomes possible is regardless of the circumstances, you can experience being peaceful, happy, and satisfied. That's hard to believe, right? It really is hard to believe. And yet, the evidence is there. We now know, we have had scientists do research on the brains of meditators that have practiced for decades, right? And there's no question about the fact that they are peaceful, happy, and satisfied. I mean, you can just see it. You can just see the way they're being. Yeah. Well, the thing is, if you do it consistently over time, going to a retreat will become a natural reality. Because if you do it consistently over time and you start to get a sense of the possibility, right, then you're willing to put yourself in a situation like that that will challenge you, but it will also move your experience of waking up a quantum leap at one time, you know. If I can get a value from practicing meditation 30 minutes a day, right, and I'm good enough at that, you know, that I'm actually practicing meditation, and then I go to a retreat for 7 days, no talking for the entire time, practicing, you know, 7 or 8 times a day for 7 days straight, meeting with the teacher twice a day to check in with you about how you're practicing and to help you learn about the teachings. When you come out the other side of that, right, you actually have to, when you come out the other side of that, you actually have to re-enter the world again, you know, because it puts you in. It's beautiful in a way because for most people it allows them to experience a possibility that's down the road from where you are, or all of a sudden down the road from where you are, right? But even if you never go to a retreat, you know, I say even if you never go to a retreat, but you're a serious student and you study the teaching seriously and you do this practice every day like brushing your teeth, you will experience a transformation. You will experience a transcendental state in which you are no longer subject to just the circumstances. Things can happen, and when they happen, your ability to be present to them and to be resilient about it and recover from them and be realistic about how you're going to deal with them, that's, you know, the value of that, what is the value of that, right? That can make the difference as to whether or not your life is a success or not. It can make the difference as to whether or not your life has quality. What good is living a life that's just putting up with it? You know, what good is living a life that's just getting through it? That's how most people are living their life. They're trying to do everything they can to make it as less complicated as possible and as comfortable as possible. Of course, there's only so much you can control. But that's how they're living their life. They're trying to get the money, to buy the comfort, to be in control, to have the security, and to repeat the patterns, you know. So there's nothing unfamiliar, there's nothing threatening. We want to stay in this safe place all the time. Right? That's not possible. Even if you do succeed at that to some extent, that will be challenged. There will be inevitable things. That's why they say in Buddhism, you know, no matter how good you get at controlling circumstances, we will all face the same thing in this life in terms of sickness, old age, and death. There's no way around it. And we will always also face the same thing in terms of life, which is unpredictability. You don't know what's going to happen. You just don't know what's going to happen. And even if you have a controlled reality and you're in a comfortable life, right? When that breaks down, when you're in a car accident, when you get a serious medical diagnosis, right, it'll freak you all the way out because you have no way to be with it. You have no way to be with it. You know, people go into shock. People go into shock when something happens that's unexpected, that has serious consequences, right? My teacher, you know, who had renal failure, you know, and he had been practicing for 35 years with a traditional Zen master, and he was diagnosed with renal failure and was facing his death. And he had a conversation with the doctor, and he said, well, if I don't, because he didn't want to go on dialysis. So he said, if I don't do anything, what will the death be like? And the doctor said, it's not bad at all. You just, you know, it won't be very uncomfortable. He said, I'll take it. And he wasn't freaked out. He wasn't freaked out. He had been practicing so long, and he had been so thoroughly aware of his true nature as awareness itself. Remember, if your true nature is awareness itself, is that awareness physical? No. Is that awareness threatened by anything? Is the space in this room threatened by our presence? The awareness that you are, which is your true nature, is just like the space in this room. It's not threatened by anything that happens. It's not affected by anything that happens. And if you practice this over time, where you get to a point where you're experiencing your true nature as it really is instead of the identity that you think you are, and things happen like that where you experience a serious diagnosis, it's just information. It's just information. So you can take it one way or the other. You know, you can keep trying to live the way most people live, right? And end up on medication to control your anxiety and control your depression, you know, and end up on, you know, some diet of alcohol or marijuana or a lot of sports or a lot of something to just keep you busy so you don't have to think about the truth. Or you can practice meditation and learn how to live and be happy. Simple as that.